The most feared man in Chicago made his decision in the time it took for a porcelain plate to shatter against the kitchen floor, followed by the sound of a pregnant woman sobbing like the world had finally broken her. Michael Alexander heard it. Hannah Edwards had no idea he was listening, and in that moment of raw, unguarded pain, both their lives shifted onto a path neither could have imagined. One that would end with a man's complete disappearance from Chicago. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're ready for another captivating story, go ahead and click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I love knowing how far our stories travel and how many hearts they reach. Your support helps us bring even more thrilling tales your way. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Now, settle in. Let's begin the story. Hannah's hands trembled as she stared at the shattered porcelain scattered across the industrial kitchen floor. Her mind was screaming the same desperate mantra. Don't cry. Don't cry. Duarte will fire you. Tom will scream. You can't afford to lose this job. But her body betrayed her. 7 months pregnant, exhausted from a double shift, hollowed out by Justin's abandonment, and the sob broke free before she could stop it. In the dining room beyond those kitchen doors, Michael Alexander was no longer focused on the payment discrepancies he'd come to discuss. His mind had already shifted into something far more dangerous than business, into memory. He'd heard a sound like that before, his mother, 26 years ago, crying in their apartment kitchen while pregnant with him, powerless against poverty and cruelty. This one won't end the same way, he thought, his jaw tightening. Not while I'm listening. Hannah pressed her palms against the stainless steel counter, trying to steady her breathing. She had no idea that the owner of the restaurant was already walking toward the kitchen. She didn't know that Michael Alexander controlled half of Chicago's underworld through shell companies and quiet authority. She didn't know he'd just decided she would never cry like this again. Are you okay? The voice came from behind her, calm, controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of something that made the entire kitchen staff freeze. Hannah spun around, her tear-streaked face colliding with the sight of a man in an impeccable black suit standing in the doorway. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread about power and wealth, completely out of place in this chaos of copper pots and industrial ovens. Michael studied her with the same intensity he used to assess threats and territories. She was maybe 26, 7 months pregnant based on the curve barely hidden by her oversized uniform, and carrying exhaustion that went deeper than one shift. Her eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd stopped expecting anyone to care. That expression, that bone-deep resignation, it ignited something in him that money and power had never touched. She thinks she's invisible, he realized. She has no idea she just became the most protected woman in this city. I'm fine, Hannah lied automatically, her voice cracking on the word. I'm so sorry about the plate. I'll pay for it. I'll clean it up. Please don't. Who made you cry? His question cut through her apology like a blade through silk. Hannah wanted to say it was nothing. Lying had kept her employed, kept Duarte from screaming, kept Tom from making her life worse. But to understand why those 4 words from a stranger nearly broke her completely, you need to know what brought her to this kitchen floor. You need to understand the months of invisible suffering that led to this moment. 3 months earlier, Hannah Edwards had been a different woman. Not happy exactly, but hopeful. She'd believed Justin when he said they'd figure it out together. She'd believed the positive pregnancy test was the beginning of something beautiful, not the end of everything she knew. I can't do this. 5 words that detonated her entire life. Justin left that night, moved out of their apartment, blocked her number, disappeared, like their year together had been fiction. Hannah had stood in that empty apartment, one hand on her stomach, and realized she was more alone than she'd ever been. The bills came next. Rent, utilities, prenatal vitamins she couldn't afford, clinic visits she skipped because bus fare meant choosing between transportation and food. She'd picked up double shifts at La Riva, the upscale restaurant where she'd worked part-time through college, and prayed her uniform would hide what was becoming impossible to conceal. Duarte, the restaurant manager, had built his petty kingdom on humiliation. He criticized her pace, her appearance, the way she carried plates. You're getting slow, Edwards, he'd sneer. Customers don't tip incompetence. What he didn't know, what she desperately hid, was that her swollen feet could barely hold her upright by hour 10, that her back screamed with every tray she lifted. That nausea still hit her randomly despite being past the first trimester. Then there was Tom, the head chef whose volcanic temper had sent 3 servers to early retirement. He ruled his kitchen through fear and intimidation, And pregnant women? They were liabilities he refused to tolerate. So Hannah hid. She wore oversized shirts beneath her uniform. She took bathroom breaks to collect herself when the baby kicked. She smiled through the pain because survival required invisibility. Until tonight. Until her exhausted hands finally failed her, and porcelain shattered against unforgiving tile. Until Duarte appeared instantly, his face twisted with rage. "Are you kidding me, Edwards? That's coming out of your paycheck. Do you have any idea how much those plates cost?" Until Tom emerged from his station, screaming about incompetence and uselessness and how she was lucky to even have a job. Until every cruel word, every missed meal, every night crying herself to sleep, every moment of Justin's betrayal crashed over her at once, and she couldn't hold it back anymore. And that's when Michael Alexander heard her. When this man who'd built an empire on emotional distance, who trusted no one, who solved problems with calculated violence, heard a sound that transported him back to his own mother's suffering, and made a choice that defied everything his world stood for. Now he stood before her in this kitchen, waiting for an answer to an impossibly simple question. "Who made you cry?" Hannah looked up at him through tears. This stranger in the expensive suit who'd asked like her answer actually mattered. She saw something in his eyes that terrified and confused her. Genuine concern from someone who looked like he'd never concerned himself with anyone. Behind Michael, Bergeron watched from the kitchen entrance, his expression unreadable. But inside, Michael's most trusted associate was experiencing something close to shock. In 15 years of service, he'd never seen his boss walk into a kitchen. He'd never seen Michael kneel beside anyone. He'd certainly never seen him look at a crying waitress like her pain was a problem that needed solving. With the same intensity he brought to territorial disputes. "Everything," Hannah whispered finally, the truth escaping before she could cage it. "Everything made me cry." Michael's jaw tightened. "Where's the father?" "Gone." That single word carried the weight of 3 months of abandonment, betrayal, and terror. "He left when I told him about the baby." Something shifted in Michael's eyes. Something dark and final. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a business card with only a phone number, and placed it carefully on the counter beside her. "My name is Michael Alexander," he said quietly. "And nobody is going to make you cry again." Hannah stared at the card, not understanding what was happening, not knowing that she'd just become untouchable in Chicago's underworld. But Michael understood perfectly. And within 48 hours, so would everyone who'd ever made Hannah Edwards feel invisible, especially Justin. In whatever remained of his last moments, Hannah Edwards stood in that kitchen, staring at the business card in her trembling hands, unable to process what had just happened. Michael Alexander. The name meant nothing to her. She didn't know that the man who'd just knelt beside her controlled more of Chicago than the mayor. She didn't know his word could end careers, businesses, lives. All she knew was that for the first time in 3 months, someone had asked if she was okay, and meant it. But to understand why that simple question shattered something inside her, you need to see what her life had become. You need to see the invisible woman Hannah Edwards had been forced to be. 6 months ago, Hannah had worked at La Riva part-time while finishing her marketing degree. She'd had plans, a small apartment she loved, a boyfriend she trusted, a future that felt possible. Then 2 pink lines changed everything. She'd told Justin on a Thursday evening, made his favorite dinner, tried to make the moment special despite her terror. She'd watched his face go from confusion to horror in the space of 3 seconds. "You're keeping it?" His voice had gone cold, distant, like he was already calculating his exit. "I thought we could." "I can't do this, Hannah. I'm not ready. I'm not." He'd stood up from the table, started packing that same night. "This is your choice, not mine." By Friday morning he was gone, blocked her number, removed every trace of her from his social media. Vanished like their entire relationship had been a lie. Hannah had sat in that apartment for 3 days, one hand on her stomach, trying to figure out how she'd survive. The marketing degree she'd been so close to finishing suddenly felt impossible. Graduation required an unpaid internship she couldn't afford. Not anymore, not with a baby coming. So she'd made the only choice available. She dropped out, picked up full-time hours at La Riva, started working doubles, triples when they'd let her. Every paycheck disappeared before she could cash it. Rent, utilities, doctor visits she could barely afford. Food became optional. Sleep became a luxury. And she hid. God, how she hid. She bought uniforms 2 sizes too large, wore baggy sweaters underneath, angled her body away from customers when taking orders. took bathroom breaks when the baby kicked too hard to conceal. She became invisible by necessity. Because women like her, pregnant and alone and desperate, they didn't keep jobs at upscale restaurants. Duarte made sure she understood that every single day. You're slower than usual, Edwards. His voice always carried that edge of contempt. Customers are complaining. Your section is a mess. Are you even trying anymore? She'd smile. Apologize. Work faster even when her back screamed and her feet swelled so badly she could barely walk by closing time. She'd endure his criticism because she knew the truth behind his words. You're disposable. You're replaceable. You're one mistake from losing everything. And then there was Tom, head chef, tyrant. A man whose rage could clear a kitchen in seconds. He'd thrown plates at servers for minor mistakes, made grown men cry with his screaming, and he'd made it clear from day one that he had no patience for weakness. If you can't handle the heat, get out of my kitchen. His favorite phrase. Screamed at anyone who hesitated, stumbled, showed any sign of being human. Hannah had learned to move like a ghost in that kitchen. Silent, efficient, invisible. Until tonight. Until her exhausted body finally gave out and porcelain shattered, and 3 months of buried pain exploded in a sob she couldn't control. Meanwhile, across the restaurant in a private corner booth, Michael Alexander had been conducting business. The kind of business that looked like a dinner meeting to anyone watching. 2 men in suits. Quiet conversation. Nothing unusual. Except Michael Alexander didn't do usual. He did absolute control. He'd built his empire on discipline. On reading people. On knowing exactly when someone was lying, skimming, or betraying him. The restaurant manager had been moving money. Small amounts. Probably thought Michael would never notice. Michael noticed everything. The discrepancies started 6 weeks ago, Bergeron was saying, sliding documents across the table. Always under 500. Always from the weekend deposits. Michael's eyes scanned the numbers with the precision of a man who'd survived by trusting nothing and no one. Control was everything. Chaos was death. His father had been chaos. Drunk, violent, unpredictable. His mother had suffered for it every day of Michael's childhood. He'd watched her work 3 jobs while pregnant with him. Watched her cry over bills she couldn't pay. Watched her flinch when his father walked into a room. Watched her become invisible to survive. And he'd sworn, standing over her grave 12 years later, that he'd never be powerless again. That chaos would never touch anything he controlled. Then he heard the crash, the sob. And suddenly he was 8 years old again, listening to his mother cry in their apartment kitchen while his father screamed about money they didn't have. That's when he stood up. That's when he walked into that kitchen. That's when years of buried pain cracked open, and Michael Alexander made a choice that had nothing to do with business, and everything to do with the boy who couldn't save his own mother. Now, standing in that kitchen with Hannah's quiet devastation still echoing in the air, Michael turned toward the dining room. His expression hadn't changed. But Bergeron, who'd worked with him for 15 years, recognized the shift immediately. Bring Duarte to my table. Michael's voice was calm, perfectly controlled. Now. Bergeron moved without hesitation. He'd seen Michael angry before, seen him cold, seen him calculating. But this was different. This wasn't the anger of a man whose money was being stolen. This was personal. 5 minutes later, Duarte stood beside Michael's table, still arrogant, still convinced his position protected him. Mr. Alexander, is there a problem with your meal? I can... Sit down. Duarte sat, his smile faltering slightly. Michael didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. How long have you been manager here? 3 years, sir. I've increased revenue by... How do you speak to your staff? Silence. Duarte's face went pale. I heard what you said to Hannah Edwards tonight. Michael leaned forward slightly. About the plate, about her paycheck, about her being slow. Sir, she dropped an expensive... I don't care about the plate. Each word precise, controlled, lethal. I care about the woman who's been working doubles for 3 months while 7 months pregnant because she has nowhere else to go. I care about the manager who's been stealing from me while treating his staff like they're disposable. Duarte's face had gone from pale to gray. I didn't know she was... You didn't know because she was hiding it. From you. From Tom. Because she knew exactly how you'd treat her if you found out. Michael's jaw tightened. You're fired. Effective immediately. Bergeron will escort you out. You can't. I own this restaurant, Duarte. I can do whatever I want. And just like that, The man who'd made Hannah's life miserable for months was gone, escorted out by Bergeron while the evening shift staff watched in stunned silence. Bergeron returned minutes later, studied his boss carefully. That was personal. Michael looked at the broken porcelain still scattered on the kitchen floor. Fragile. Shattered. But not beyond repair. Not if someone powerful enough decided it mattered. Yes, he said quietly. It was. The kitchen had gone quiet. That unnatural kind of silence that happens when everyone knows something significant just occurred. Hannah stood near the dishwashing station, still clutching Michael's business card, her mind spinning. Duarte was gone. Just like that. Escorted out by the man in the dark suit who'd stood watch while Michael talked to her. The other servers whispered among themselves, stealing glances at Hannah like she'd somehow caused an earthquake. She needed to clean up the broken plate, finish her shift, get home before her feet gave out completely, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Then she heard footsteps, measured, deliberate, coming back toward the kitchen. Michael Alexander appeared in the doorway again. This time, he didn't pause, didn't wait for permission. He walked straight in like he owned the place. Because he did. The kitchen staff scattered. Tom, the head chef who'd screamed at Hannah an hour ago, suddenly found urgent business at the far prep station. The line cooks became intensely focused on their stations. The dishwasher discovered a pressing need to check inventory in the back. Within seconds, Hannah stood alone with the most powerful man she'd never known existed. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not because she feared he'd hurt her, but because men like him, men in $1,000 suits who commanded rooms with their presence, they didn't help people like her. They used them, discarded them, made promises they never kept. She'd learned that lesson with Justin. You're still shaking. Michael's observation wasn't a question, just a fact stated in that same calm voice that somehow made everyone listen. I'm okay. Really. I just need to clean this up and... Leave it. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the precise tailoring of his suit, the subtle gray threading in his dark hair, the way his eyes tracked every detail like he was reading a book only he could see. When's the last time you ate? The question caught her off guard. This morning, I think. You think? Hannah's cheeks flushed. It's been busy. I forgot. Michael's jaw tightened. He looked at her, really looked at her, in a way that made her want to hide and be seen all at once. His gaze traveled from her tear-stained face, down to where her oversized uniform hung awkwardly, to where it no longer hid what she'd been desperately concealing. The curve was subtle, but unmistakable. 7 months of another life growing inside her, that she'd tried to make invisible through baggy fabric and careful positioning. Michael saw it. She watched recognition flash across his face. Please, Hannah started, her voice breaking. Please don't fire me. I know I should have said something. I know pregnant women aren't supposed to work this much. But I need this job. I don't have anywhere else to go. I don't have anyone who... Stop. She stopped, pressed her lips together to keep from crying again. Michael reached up and began unbuttoning his suit jacket. The movement was so unexpected that Hannah froze, confusion replacing terror. What was he doing? He shrugged out of the jacket. Expensive. Perfectly tailored. Probably worth more than everything she owned combined. And then he did something that made absolutely no sense. He draped it over her shoulders. The jacket was warm, heavy. It smelled like expensive cologne, and something else she couldn't name. Safety, maybe. The kind of protection she hadn't felt in months. You're cold, he said simply. Hannah looked down at herself. She hadn't even noticed she was trembling from more than just fear. The kitchen's industrial air conditioning combined with shock had left her shaking. I can't, this is too expensive. I'll ruin it. I don't care about the jacket. 3 simple words. But the way he said them, with such absolute certainty, made her throat tighten. Michael pulled over a kitchen stool and gestured for her to sit. She did, because her legs had been threatening to give out anyway. He remained standing, but positioned himself at her eye level, not looming. Not intimidating, just present. What's your name? He asked. Your full name. Hannah Edwards. How old are you, Hannah? 26. He nodded slowly, processing. Then he asked the question she'd been dreading. The one that made everything real and unbearable. Where's the father? The kitchen seemed to contract around those 3 words. Hannah felt the jacket slip slightly off one shoulder. Felt the weight of 7 months of abandonment pressing against her chest. Felt every moment she'd spent wondering how she'd survive this alone. Gone. The word came out as barely a whisper, but in the quiet kitchen, it landed like a confession. Michael's entire body went still. Not the stillness of someone who didn't care, the stillness of someone who cared too much. His hands, which had been loose at his sides, curled into fists. His jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jump beneath his skin. That single word had cut through him like a blade finding an old wound. Gone. He'd heard that word before, felt the weight of it. His own father had been gone in every way that mattered long before he actually left, gone while still in the house, gone while his mother worked herself into exhaustion, gone while she cried in the kitchen, pregnant and alone and terrified. Michael had been 8 years old, completely powerless, watching his mother's world crumble because the man who should have protected her had chosen to be gone instead. He'd sworn he'd never be that powerless again. When? His voice had dropped even lower. Dangerous now in a different way. 3 months ago. When I told him about the baby. Michael closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, something had fundamentally shifted. This wasn't just compassion anymore. This was recognition. This was personal history bleeding into present responsibility. What's his name? Why? Hannah's voice trembled. She didn't understand what was happening. Didn't understand why this stranger cared. Because nobody walks away from their child. Michael's words carried the weight of absolute conviction. Not without consequences. Hannah clutched his jacket tighter around her shoulders. Part of her wanted to give him Justin's name. Wanted someone, anyone, to make Justin understand what he'd done. To make him feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused. But a larger part of her was terrified of what this man might do with that information. Justin, she whispered anyway, because she was too exhausted to lie, too broken to protect someone who'd never protected her. Justin Hall. Michael committed the name to memory. Filed it away with the same precision he used for every enemy, every threat, every problem that needed solving. You won't see him again, he said. Not a threat, not a promise, just a statement of fact. And somehow, Hannah believed him. She sat there in an industrial kitchen, wearing a stranger's jacket, carrying a child alone, and for the first time in 3 months, felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope, dangerous, fragile, but real. Why are you helping me? The question escaped before she could stop it. Michael looked at her, really looked at her. And for just a moment, the carefully controlled mask slipped. She saw grief there, old pain, the kind that never fully heals. Because someone should have helped my mother. His voice barely above a whisper. And no one did. Morning light filtered through the restaurant's front windows as the day shift arrived for prep. Word had spread overnight. Whispers filled the kitchen like smoke. Duarte was gone. Fired. Just like that. And the reason? A pregnant waitress nobody had paid attention to until the owner himself walked into the kitchen and changed everything. Hannah arrived for her shift 30 minutes early. Exhausted from a sleepless night spent staring at Michael Alexander's business card. She'd looked him up online at 2 a.m, found almost nothing. A few business registrations, shell companies, real estate holdings, the kind of digital footprint that screamed money and power and secrets. What she didn't find were the words that would have terrified her. Mafia. Organized crime. The most dangerous man in Chicago. She pushed through the restaurant's back entrance, bracing herself for the stares, for the questions, for Tom's inevitable explosion about last night's chaos. Instead, she found the entire staff gathered in the main dining room. Even Tom had left his kitchen domain. Everyone stood in tense silence, facing the front entrance, where Michael Alexander sat at a corner table, waiting. Bergeron stood beside him, that same unreadable expression on his face. But there was something different about the way he watched the room. Alert, protective, like he expected trouble. Hannah's heart dropped into her stomach. Why was Michael here? Had he changed his mind? Decided firing Duarte wasn't enough? Was he going to fire everyone who'd witnessed her breakdown? Good. Everyone's here. Michael's voice carried across the room without rising in volume. He had that quality. The kind of presence that made silence fall naturally. I have a few things to clarify. The staff exchanged nervous glances. Hannah noticed Tom had gone pale. The volatile chef who ruled through intimidation looked like he might actually be sick. Some of you worked last night, Michael continued. You saw what happened. For those who didn't, let me explain. Your manager Duarte was terminated. Not because of stolen revenue, though that was reason enough. He was fired because of how he treated his staff. A ripple of shock moved through the room. Managers got fired for skimming money. Everyone knew that. But for being mean to servers? That never happened. This restaurant operates under my ownership, Michael said, which means it operates under my standards. And I have zero tolerance for cruelty. Hannah felt every eye in the room shift toward her. Heat flooded her cheeks. She wanted to disappear into the floor. Some of you might think last night was an isolated incident, Michael continued. His gaze moved to Tom. It wasn't. Tom straightened. Tried to look defiant. Failed miserably. Tom, step forward. The head chef hesitated. Bergeron made the smallest gesture with his hand. Tom walked forward like a man approaching his execution. How long have you been head chef here? Michael asked. 4 years. Tom's voice came out rougher than usual, defensive. And in those 4 years, how many staff members have quit because of your temper? Silence. Tom's jaw clenched. I'll answer for you, Michael said. 17. I reviewed the HR records this morning. 17 people who couldn't tolerate your kitchen because you rule through fear and intimidation. Tom's hands curled into fists. Hannah could see him struggling between rage and terror. The rage wanted to explode. The terror understood who he was dealing with. That ends today, Michael said. Simple. Final. You will treat every person in your kitchen with respect. You will manage through skill and leadership, not volume and cruelty. If I hear of one more incident, one more person reduced to tears because of your temper, you're finished. Not just here, everywhere. Do you understand? Tom nodded. Once. Sharp. Say it out loud. I understand. The words came out strangled. Good. Get back to work. Tom retreated to his kitchen like a scolded dog. The transformation was stunning. The tyrant of La Riva had been neutered with nothing more than quiet authority and the weight of consequence. Michael's attention shifted to the rest of the staff. The same standard applies to everyone. This is a place of business, not a battlefield. You will treat each other with basic human dignity. If you can't manage that, there are plenty of other restaurants in Chicago. He let that sink in for a moment. Then his gaze found Hannah. She tried to make herself smaller, but there was nowhere to hide. Hannah Edwards is under my direct protection, Michael said. Each word carefully chosen, deliberately placed. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave now. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. She will work the shifts she chooses. She will take breaks when needed. And when her child arrives, she will have a job waiting for her when she's ready to return. Is that clear? Murmured agreement rippled through the staff. Hannah felt tears threatening again, but these were different. These weren't tears of exhaustion or humiliation. These were something else entirely. Gratitude. Dangerous, overwhelming gratitude for a man she barely knew. Michael stood, buttoned his suit jacket. Get to work. The staff scattered. Hannah moved toward the kitchen, but Bergeron intercepted her gently. Mr. Alexander would like a word. Privately. She followed them to the corner table, her pulse hammering. Michael gestured for her to sit. She did, acutely aware of how wrong she looked in her server uniform across from him in his perfectly tailored suit. How are you feeling? He asked. Confused, she admitted. Why are you doing this? I told you last night. Someone should have helped my mother. He paused. I'm making sure someone helps you. Hannah twisted her hands in her lap. People are going to talk. They're going to think that we. Let them think whatever they want, Michael said. You're safe now. That's what matters. She wanted to argue, wanted to explain that protection always came with a price. That men didn't help women like her without expecting something in return. But the look in his eyes stopped her. There was no calculation there. No hidden agenda. Just something that looked almost like pain. Thank you, she whispered. Michael nodded once. Then he looked at Bergeron. Give us a moment. Bergeron stepped away, positioning himself near the entrance. Watchful. Professional. But Hannah saw the way he looked at his boss. Like he was witnessing something unprecedented. I need you to understand something, Michael said quietly. My protection isn't temporary. It's not conditional. You don't owe me anything. Not gratitude. Not loyalty. Nothing. Then why? Because I can. He said it so simply. Like having the power to change someone's life, and choosing to use it was the most natural thing in the world. And because you deserve better than what you've been given. Hannah's throat tightened. I don't even know you. No, he agreed. But I know what it looks like when someone is drowning. And I know what it looks like when everyone else pretends not to see. He stood, prepared to leave. But before he did, he placed another business card on the table. This one had a different number. My personal line, he said. If you need anything, Anything at all. You call that number." Then he walked out, Bergeron following silently behind him. They didn't speak until they were in Michael's car, the privacy partition raised between them and the driver. "You're playing a dangerous game," Bergeron said finally. "I know. The families will see this as weakness. Let them." Bergeron studied his boss. 15 years of service had taught him when to push and when to stay silent. This was a staying silent moment. Almost. "What do you want me to do about Justin Hall?" he asked. Michael's jaw tightened. "Find him. Quietly. Efficiently. I want to know where he lives, where he works, every debt, every secret, everything. And then we have a conversation about responsibility." Bergeron heard what wasn't being said. This wouldn't be a conversation. This would be an ending. Consider it done. Justin Hall had always been good at running. From responsibility. From consequences. From anything that required him to be more than a charming smile and empty promises. He'd left Hannah 3 months ago without looking back. Blocked her number while sitting in a bar, celebrating his freedom with shots he couldn't afford. Posted photos with other women within a week. Acted like the year they'd spent together, like the child growing inside her, like all of it had been nothing more than an inconvenient mistake. But running from Hannah was easy. Running from the debts he'd accumulated? That was becoming impossible. Justin owed money, a lot of money, to people who didn't accept excuses or extensions. He'd started small. Sports betting, online poker. Just for fun, he'd told himself. Just to blow off steam. Then the wins stopped coming and the losses piled up. 5,000 became 10. 10 became 20. 20 became the kind of number that made him wake up at 3 in the morning with his heart racing. The loan sharks he'd borrowed from weren't patient men. They'd started leaving messages, showing up at his apartment building, making it clear that his time was running out. So Justin did what Justin did best. He made a plan to disappear. New city, new name, new life where nobody knew about the pregnant girlfriend he'd abandoned, or the debts he'd never pay. He just needed 1 more week, 7 days to liquidate what little he had, collect his last paycheck, and vanish before anyone could stop him. He didn't know he was already out of time. 40 miles across Chicago, Michael Alexander sat in his penthouse study, reviewing files Bergeron had delivered an hour ago. The space was minimalist, clean lines, dark wood, everything precisely arranged, control reflected in furniture and silence. 3 dossiers lay spread across his desk, complete background checks compiled in less than 24 hours. Bank records, social media history, employment records, known associates. Bergeron's team was efficient, thorough. They'd built careers on finding information people wanted hidden. The first file belonged to Duarte, already handled, blacklisted from every restaurant in Chicago, his reputation destroyed with 3 phone calls. The second belonged to Tom, on probation. 1 more incident, and he'd find himself unemployable. The third belonged to Justin Hall. Michael read through it with the same detachment he used for business competitors. 29 years old, marketing consultant, mediocre employment record. History of jumping from job to job when consequences caught up with him. Gambling problem. Outstanding debts totaling $32,000. 3 different loan sharks actively pursuing collection. A coward. A liar. A man who abandoned a pregnant woman without a second thought. Michael's jaw tightened. This wasn't business. This was personal. He flipped to the next page. Found the photo Bergeron's team had pulled from social media. Justin at a bar, arm around some blonde, huge smile on his face. Posted 2 weeks after he'd left Hannah. Michael's hand curled into a fist. Then he turned the page again, found the surveillance photo from the restaurant. Hannah, 7 months pregnant, carrying a tray that looked too heavy. Face drawn with exhaustion, trying to smile for customers while her entire world crumbled. Something in Michael's chest constricted. The contrast was obscene. This man celebrating his freedom while she suffered alone. While she worked herself into exhaustion. While she cried on kitchen floors because her body and spirit had finally given out. No. Michael closed the file. His decision had already been made the moment Hannah whispered, "Gone." Now it was just a matter of execution. He picked up his phone, pressed 1 button. Bergeron answered on the first ring. "Handle it," Michael said. "Tonight." Understood. No questions. No hesitation. 15 years of loyalty meant Bergeron knew exactly what "handle it" implied. Michael ended the call. Stood. Walked to the window overlooking Chicago's skyline. The city spread out below him like a kingdom built on steel and secrets. He'd spent years constructing this empire, learning to bury emotion, to make decisions based on strategy, not feeling. But looking at that photo of Hannah, seeing the exhaustion and pain she'd tried so hard to hide, Michael felt something he hadn't allowed himself in years. Rage, pure, righteous, the kind that came from watching powerless people suffer while cowards walked free. His mother had suffered like that, worked herself to death while his father drank away their future. No one had helped her. No one had stopped the man who destroyed her. Michael had been 8 years old, completely powerless. He wasn't powerless anymore. 48 hours later, Hannah stood in the restaurant break room, staring at her phone in disbelief. The text had come from Rachel, one of Justin's co-workers. Someone Hannah had met exactly twice during the year she dated him. "Hey, weird question, but do you know where Justin went? His apartment is completely cleared out. Landlord says he broke his lease. Phone disconnected. Nobody at work has heard from him. It's like he just vanished." Hannah read the message 3 times. Her hands started shaking. Gone. Actually gone. She should call someone, file a missing persons report, do something, but she couldn't move, couldn't think past the rushing in her ears. Part of her wanted to panic, to worry, to feel something resembling concern for a man she'd once loved. But that part was drowned out by something far stronger. Relief. Pure, overwhelming, shameful relief. The man who'd abandoned her was gone. Really gone. Not just blocked numbers and ignored messages, actually erased from existence. She wouldn't run into him at the grocery store. Wouldn't have to explain to her child someday why their father didn't want them. Wouldn't have to navigate custody battles or child support arguments or any of the painful logistics of forced co-parenting with someone who'd made it clear he didn't care. He was just gone. And Hannah felt safe for the first time in 3 months. Then the guilt hit, crashing over her like a wave. What kind of person felt relief when someone disappeared? What kind of monster was grateful for something that might mean Justin was hurt, or in danger, or worse? But even as the guilt twisted in her stomach, the relief remained, solid, undeniable. She pressed her hand against her belly, felt the baby kick, and thought, "We're going to be okay." She didn't know how she knew, didn't question the timing, didn't connect Michael Alexander's protection to Justin's sudden disappearance. She just knew. On some instinctive level, they were safe now. Later that night, Michael sat in his study again. Bergeron had just finished his report. Clean, efficient, no traces. Justin Hall no longer existed in Chicago. Not in any way that mattered. His debts had been paid to the loan sharks with a clear message about who owned him now. His apartment cleared, his belongings disposed of, every digital footprint scrubbed. The man himself? That was handled too, permanently. Was it worth it? Bergeron asked quietly, a rare moment of questioning from a man who usually just followed orders. Michael thought about Hannah's tears, about his mother's suffering, about 8-year-old boys who couldn't save the women they loved, and 34-year-old men who'd sworn they'd never be powerless again. "Ask her when she stops crying," he said. Bergeron nodded. Understood. Some debts couldn't be measured in money or logic. Some justice existed outside the law. And some men, like Justin Hall, didn't deserve the mercy of second chances. He left Michael alone in the study, alone with the knowledge of what he'd done, and the certainty that he'd do it again without hesitation, because Hannah Edwards would never cry over Justin Hall again. That was worth everything. Hannah's landlord delivered the eviction notice on a Thursday morning. 30 days to vacate. The rent increase she'd been warned about had finally arrived, and the number on the paper might as well have been $1 million. She couldn't afford it, not even close. She stood in her tiny apartment, one hand on her swollen belly, staring at the notice until the words blurred together. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading since Justin left, the moment when survival stopped being difficult and became impossible. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "How are you feeling, Michael?" She stared at it for a long moment. They'd barely spoken since that morning at the restaurant 4 days ago, since Justin had vanished without a trace, since her entire world had shifted in ways she still didn't fully understand. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she did something that went against every instinct she'd developed in 3 months of forced independence. She told the truth. "I just got an eviction notice. Rent increase I can't afford." His response came within seconds. "Pack what you need. I'm sending a car in 2 hours." Hannah's heart stopped. "What? No, I can't just—" "You need a place to stay. I have one. This isn't a debate, Hannah." She wanted to refuse. wanted to explain that accepting help from him, from a man she barely knew who'd somehow turned her life upside down in less than a week, was dangerous, reckless, the kind of choice that had consequences she couldn't predict. But she looked around her apartment, at the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, at the bassinet she'd bought secondhand, still in its box because she had nowhere to put it, at the eviction notice that made her homelessness official. She typed back, "Okay." 2 hours later, a black car pulled up outside her building. Not a taxi, not in rideshare. An actual town car with a driver who loaded her 3 suitcases into the trunk like she was someone important instead of a broke waitress with nowhere else to go. The drive took 40 minutes. Hannah watched Chicago transform outside the window. The neighborhoods got quieter, the houses got bigger, the gates got taller. When they finally stopped, Hannah's breath caught. The mansion sat behind iron gates and stone walls, not ostentatious, not flashy, but undeniably powerful. The kind of home that whispered wealth so old and established it didn't need to shout. Armed guards stood at the entrance, actually armed, with earpieces and everything. What had she agreed to? Michael met her at the front door, same impeccable suit, same controlled presence, but something in his eyes softened when he saw her struggling with her suitcase. "Let me." He took it from her before she could protest. "Welcome." The interior was exactly what she expected. Marble floors, high ceilings, art that probably cost more than she'd earn in 10 years. Everything precise, ordered, beautiful in a way that felt almost sterile. "Your room is upstairs," Michael said, guiding her through hallways that seemed to stretch forever. "Private bathroom, balcony overlooking the lake. Whatever you need, just ask the staff." Staff. He had staff. He opened a door to reveal a bedroom 3 times the size of her entire apartment. A king bed with white linens, a sitting area, windows that showcased Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon. "This is too much," Hannah whispered. "It's temporary," Michael said, though something in his tone suggested he didn't believe that any more than she did. "Until you get back on your feet." He left her alone. Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her coat, trying to process what had just happened. She'd moved into a mansion, with a man she'd known for less than a week, a man who'd fired people for her, who'd made her ex-boyfriend disappear, who commanded armed guards and lived in the kind of luxury she'd only seen in movies. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt safe. The days developed a rhythm. Hannah woke to silence. The kind of complete quiet that only exists when walls are thick and neighbors are non-existent. She'd find breakfast waiting in the kitchen. Fresh fruit. Pastries. Coffee she wasn't supposed to drink, but that sat there anyway. As if Michael hadn't bothered to learn pregnancy restrictions. He was always gone by the time she came downstairs. Business, she assumed. The kind of business that required suits and serious expressions and phone calls taken behind closed doors. But she saw evidence of him everywhere. The precisely folded newspaper on the table. The coffee cup rinsed and placed in the exact same spot each morning. The way every book in his study was organized by height and color. The control he exercised over his environment was almost obsessive. And the loneliness. God, the loneliness. She saw it in the single-place setting at the dining table. In the house that could hold 20 people but only ever held one. In the way silence filled every room like something living and sad. Michael came home late. Always after she'd already retreated to her room. She'd hear his footsteps in the hallway. Measured, deliberate, then his door closing. Then, nothing. They were living in the same house and barely speaking. 2 lonely people orbiting each other without ever connecting. Until the night she heard him scream. It was past midnight. Hannah had been awake anyway, the baby doing acrobatics against her ribs. Then she heard it. A sound that made her blood run cold. "No, no, Mama, please." Michael's voice. Raw, broken, completely unlike the controlled man she'd come to know. Hannah didn't think. She just moved. Down the hallway. To his door. She knocked softly. "Michael." The sound stopped. Silence. "Michael, are you okay?" More silence. Then footsteps. The door opened. Michael stood there in just sleep pants, his hair disheveled, his face haunted in a way that made him look years younger. Vulnerable. Lost. "I'm sorry," he said automatically. "Did I wake you? Are you okay?" She asked again. "Just a dream. Go back to bed." But Hannah saw the tremor in his hands. The way his jaw was clenched so tight it must have hurt. The way he was trying desperately to rebuild the walls that had crumbled in sleep. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked gently. No. Okay. She didn't move, just stood there, 7 months pregnant in an oversized sleep shirt, looking at this powerful man who'd saved her and refusing to let him face his demons alone. Something in Michael broke. The armor he'd maintained for weeks, years, maybe his entire adult life, finally cracked. It's always the same, he whispered. I'm 8 years old. My mother is crying in the kitchen. My father is screaming. And I can't do anything. I'm too small, too weak, too powerless to stop it. Hannah's heart shattered. Michael. She died when I was 20, worked herself to death trying to survive him. And I wasn't there. I'd left, built this whole empire, all this power, and I still couldn't save her. Hannah stepped forward, placed her hand on his arm. The first time she'd voluntarily touched him. You were a child. It wasn't your responsibility. Then why does it still feel like my fault? She didn't have an answer, just pulled him into a hug. Awkward because of her belly, unexpected because they barely knew each other, but necessary in a way neither of them could articulate. Michael stood rigid for a moment. Then his arms came around her. Carefully, like she might break. And he held on like she was the only solid thing in a tilting world. They stood there in his doorway, two broken people finding unexpected comfort in shared pain. When they finally pulled apart, something had fundamentally shifted between them. Protection had become connection. Distance had become understanding. Thank you, Michael said quietly. Anytime, Hannah replied, and meant it. For the first time in 15 years, Michael Alexander allowed someone to stay close. And neither of them felt quite so alone anymore. Across town, in a private room above a legitimate import business, 3 men sat around a table discussing Michael Alexander's unexpected vulnerability. The Corvino family had ruled the South Side for 2 generations. Not as powerful as Michael's network, not as wealthy, not as feared, but ambitious enough to recognize opportunity when it presented itself. And Michael Alexander protecting a pregnant waitress? That was opportunity. He's gone soft, Nico Corvino said, sliding surveillance photos across the table. Hannah entering Michael's mansion, Hannah on the balcony. Hannah very obviously pregnant, and very obviously living under his protection. Look at him, playing house with some nobody from a restaurant. His brother, Dominic, studied the photos with calculating eyes. This is a weakness we can exploit. Carefully, their father, Sal Corvino, cautioned. The old man had survived 40 years in Chicago's underworld by knowing when to strike and when to wait. Michael Alexander doesn't make mistakes. If he's protecting her, there's a reason. The reason doesn't matter, Nico insisted. What matters is he cares about something. Finally, after all these years of being untouchable, he's given us leverage. Sal Corvino nodded slowly. Find out everything about the girl. Who she is, where she came from, what she means to him. Then we decide how to proceed. Back at the mansion, Hannah had no idea she'd become a target. She only knew that living with Michael Alexander was the strangest experience of her life. 2 weeks had passed since the night she'd found him broken by nightmares. Since then, something had shifted between them. He started coming home earlier, joining her for dinner, asking about her day. Small gestures that felt monumental coming from a man who'd built his life on isolation. Tonight, Hannah found him in the library. A room she'd discovered 3 days ago and immediately fallen in love with. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling. First editions, rare manuscripts. Collections that probably cost more than most people's houses. Michael sat in a leather chair near the fireplace, reading. He looked up when she entered. Can't sleep? He asked. Baby's using my ribs as a punching bag. Hannah settled into the chair across from him, grateful for furniture that accommodated her expanding body. You? Thinking. About? Michael closed his book, studied her in that intense way he had, like he was trying to solve an equation that didn't have clear variables. About how you ended up here. You offered. I accepted. No, I mean... He paused, searching for words. Why you? Why did I walk into that kitchen? I've ignored worse suffering. Seen people in desperate situations and walked away without a second thought. But you... He trailed off. Hannah had wondered the same thing. Why me? She asked softly. Michael was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Outside, guards patrolled the grounds. Inside, 2 people sat in expensive silence, waiting for truth. My mother was 23 when she got pregnant with me, Michael finally said. Single, working 3 jobs. She'd gotten involved with my father thinking he'd protect her. Instead, he made her life hell. Hannah leaned forward, listening. He was a drunk, violent, unpredictable. She couldn't leave because she had nowhere to go. No family, no money, no options. Michael's jaw tightened. I grew up watching her work herself into exhaustion, watching her flinch when he walked into a room, watching her cry in the kitchen because there wasn't enough money for food. Michael. When I was 8, it got worse. He came home angry one night, started screaming about money, about the bills, about how everything was her fault. Then he hit her. Michael's voice had gone flat, emotionless. The way people talk when the memory is too painful for feeling. She was pregnant again, 4 months, and he hit her so hard she fell. Hannah's hand went to her own belly instinctively. She lost the baby. Michael continued. My little sister. Would have been. My mother never recovered. Not really. She kept working, kept surviving, but something inside her died that night. Tears streamed down Hannah's face. I'm so sorry. When I was 20, she had a heart attack at work, just collapsed. By the time I got to the hospital, she was gone. Michael's hands curled into fists. I'd left home at 17, built my business, made money, got powerful. But I wasn't there when she needed me. All that power, and I couldn't save her. You were a child when the worst happened, Hannah said gently. And a young man trying to survive when she died. Neither of those things were your fault. Maybe not, Michael agreed. But I swore, standing over her grave, that I'd never let it happen again. Never let another woman suffer like she did. Never be powerless when I had the means to help. Understanding crashed over Hannah. That's why you walked into the kitchen. I heard you crying, heard the desperation in it, and suddenly I was 8 years old again, listening to my mother sob while I hid in my room, too afraid and too small to help. Michael looked at her directly. You asked why you? Because you sounded exactly like her. And this time, I had the power to do something about it. Hannah stood, crossed the space between them, knelt beside his chair despite her awkward belly and took his hands in hers. You saved me, Michael. You know that, right? I was drowning, and you pulled me out. You shouldn't have been drowning in the first place. But I was, and you cared enough to notice. She squeezed his hands. Your mother would be proud of you. Something in Michael's expression cracked. The vulnerability he kept buried surfaced for just a moment. I hope so. They sat like that, Hannah kneeling beside him, Michael holding her hands like they were his anchor. Two people bound by shared pain and unexpected salvation. Neither of them noticed Bergeron standing in the hallway. He'd come to deliver a security report. Instead, he stood frozen, listening to his boss reveal truths he'd guarded for 15 years. Bergeron had always known Michael's motivations ran deeper than greed or power. But hearing it laid bare, understanding that every decision, every act of control, every piece of his empire was built on the foundation of a boy who couldn't save his mother. It changed everything. Michael Alexander wasn't just a crime lord. He was a wounded child who'd grown into someone powerful enough to protect the powerless. Someone who'd built an empire not for wealth, but for the ability to prevent suffering he'd once witnessed and couldn't stop. And Hannah Edwards, this pregnant waitress who'd stumbled into his world by accident, had become the living embodiment of his mother's memory. The chance to rewrite an ending he'd carried for 26 years. Bergeron quietly retreated, left them to their moment. But he understood now. Understood why his boss had risked everything for a stranger. Why he'd opened his fortress to someone who had nothing to offer in return. Because some debts transcend logic. Some wounds never heal. And some men spend their entire lives trying to save someone who's already gone. Michael Alexander had finally found a way to save his mother. He'd just been 26 years too late. Hannah woke at 2 a.m. to use the bathroom. Again. The baby had decided her bladder made an excellent trampoline. She shuffled across her room, half asleep, thinking about nothing except getting back to bed. She never heard the window open. Never heard the footsteps in the hallway. Never knew 3 armed men were moving through Michael's mansion until her bedroom door crashed open and someone grabbed her from behind. Hannah screamed. Pure instinct. Terror flooding every nerve. A hand clamped over her mouth. Shut up, a voice hissed in her ear. You're coming with us. She fought, kicked, clawed, protecting her belly with everything she had. But she was 7 months pregnant and he was twice her size and the world was tilting sideways and... Gunshots. Loud, close. The hand released her suddenly. Hannah hit the floor hard, covering her stomach with both arms. More gunshots. Shouting. The sound of bodies hitting walls. Security alarms blaring. Chaos erupting in the sanctuary that had felt so safe. She curled into herself, making her body as small as possible, and prayed, for her baby, for survival, for this nightmare to end. Then she heard his voice, cold, lethal, absolutely terrifying. Get away from her. Michael. Hannah looked up through tears, saw him standing in her doorway, gun drawn, 3 of his security team behind him. The man who'd grabbed her was on the floor, bleeding from his shoulder. 2 others had their hands raised. But Michael wasn't looking at them. He was looking at Hannah, assessing, checking for injuries with eyes that had gone completely flat. The kind of expression that meant someone was about to die. Are you hurt? His voice was eerily calm. No, I don't think so. The baby. Bergeron, get the doctor here, now. Michael stepped into the room, kept his gun trained on the intruders. Hannah, I need you to go with Patterson. He'll take you to the safe room. One of the security guards moved forward, helped Hannah to her feet with gentle hands. She was shaking so badly she could barely walk. Michael, go. Not harsh, but absolute. I'll handle this. Patterson guided her out, down a hallway she'd never seen before, through a hidden door, into a reinforced room with monitors showing every angle of the mansion. Hannah sank onto a couch, her whole body trembling. On the screens, she watched Michael interrogate the men who'd broken into her room. Couldn't hear the words, just saw the cold efficiency of it. The way information was extracted through methods she didn't want to imagine. The way one of the men kept pointing at something on his phone while Michael's expression grew darker and darker. 20 minutes later, Michael left the room. Bergeron followed. They moved through the mansion like shadows. Deadly, purposeful. Then the screens showed them leaving. Getting into cars, disappearing into Chicago's night. The doctor arrived 30 minutes after that. A woman in her 50s who examined Hannah with professional thoroughness while explaining that Michael had called her personally at 3 a.m. and she'd broken speed limits getting here. Baby's heartbeat is strong, she said finally. No signs of distress. You're both okay. Hannah burst into tears. Relief and terror and shock all colliding at once. The doctor stayed with her until dawn. Until news reports started flooding across the television in the safe room. Breaking news. Multiple fires across the south side. 3 businesses completely destroyed. Coordinated arson, police suspected. No casualties, but the message was clear. Hannah watched the screen with growing horror. Watched fire consume buildings. Watched investigators swarm the scenes. Watched reporters speculate about gang warfare and territorial disputes. She knew, without being told. Without needing confirmation. Michael had done this. For her. He returned as sunrise painted the sky orange and red. Looked exhausted. Face smudged with soot. Suit jacket gone. But alive. Whole. He found her still in the safe room, watching the news coverage with wide eyes. Hannah. Was anyone hurt? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. In the fires. Were there people inside? No. I made sure the buildings were empty. Michael moved closer slowly, like approaching a frightened animal. I would never... You burned down 3 buildings. She wasn't accusing, just stating fact, trying to process. I burned down 3 Corvino fronts, he corrected. The family that ordered the attack on you, that bribed my guard, that thought you were leverage they could use against me. And now? Now they know exactly what happens when someone threatens what's mine. His voice carried absolute conviction. No regret, no hesitation. Hannah should be terrified. Should be horrified by the casual way he discussed destruction. Should be planning her escape from this man who wielded violence like other people wielded words. But all she saw was the way his hands were shaking. The way his jaw was clenched so tight it must hurt. The way he looked at her like she was the only thing keeping him from completely unraveling. You're scared, she said softly. Michael's facade cracked. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropped to his knees beside the couch, grabbed her hands like they were the only solid thing in a tilting world. I heard you scream. His voice broke. I was in my office. Heard you scream and I've never moved so fast in my life. If I'd been 30 seconds later. But you weren't. If anything had happened to you, to the baby. He pressed his forehead against her hands. I can't. Hannah, I can't. She pulled one hand free, touched his face gently, made him look at her. I'm okay. We're okay. This is my fault. Bringing you here, putting you in danger. The Corvinos saw weakness and they exploited it. This isn't weakness, Michael. Hannah's voice was stronger now. Clear. Caring about someone isn't weakness. It's the most human thing you've done. He looked at her. Really looked at her. This pregnant woman who'd stumbled into his life by accident, who'd seen his violence and his vulnerability in equal measure, who should be running but instead was comforting him. I destroyed 3 buildings tonight, he said quietly. Ended careers, ruined lives, sent a message written in fire and ash, and I'd do it again, without hesitation, because you're worth more than all of it combined. Hannah understood then, the full scope of what she'd become to him. Not just a woman he was protecting, not just a reminder of his mother, but something real, something that mattered beyond guilt and buried pain. Thank you, she whispered, for saving me. Michael pulled her into his arms, carefully, mindful of her belly, held her like she was precious and breakable, and worth burning the world to protect. Outside, Chicago's underworld was reeling. The Corvino family would spend weeks rebuilding, and every criminal organization in the city now knew one inviolable truth. Michael Alexander's fortress had one weakness, and touching it meant total annihilation. 3 weeks after the attack, Hannah woke at 2 a.m. to a different kind of pain. Not fear this time. Something else. Something that started in her lower back and wrapped around her entire abdomen like a vice tightening. She lay still for a moment, counting, breathing, hoping it was false labor. The baby wasn't due for another month. This was too early. Too soon. Then her water broke. Michael! Her voice came out strangled, panicked. He was there in seconds, still dressed despite the hour, like he'd been waiting for disaster to strike again. He took one look at her face and understood immediately. The baby? It's coming, Michael. It's too early. Something's wrong. Nothing's wrong. His voice cut through her panic with absolute certainty. Our baby's just impatient, like her mother. Our baby. Hannah noticed the possessive. Didn't have time to process it. Michael already had his phone out. Dr. Chen, it's time. Yes, now. He hung up. Turned to Hannah. Can you walk? I think so. He helped her up, supported her weight as they made their way downstairs. Not to a car, to a wing of the mansion Hannah had never seen. A fully equipped medical suite that rivaled most hospital labor and delivery units. Dr. Chen arrived within 20 minutes, 2 nurses with her. They moved with practiced efficiency, getting Hannah situated, monitoring vitals, checking dilation. You're at 5 centimeters, Dr. Chen said. Moving fast for a first baby. We've got time, but not a lot. The contractions intensified. Hannah gripped the bed rails, breathing through pain that felt like her body was tearing itself apart. Hours blurred together. Pain and pressure and exhaustion. And through all of it, Michael stayed. He held her hand when she needed something to squeeze, wiped her forehead with cool cloths when fever set in, spoke quietly when she needed distraction, stayed silent when she needed to focus. I can't do this, Hannah gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. I can't. It's too much. Yes, you can. Michael's face was inches from hers. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You've survived everything life threw at you. You can survive this. What if something goes wrong? What if the baby... Nothing will go wrong. I won't allow it. Despite everything, Hannah almost laughed. Like he could control biology through sheer force of will. But looking at his face, seeing the absolute conviction there, she almost believed him. 8 hours into labor, Dr. Chen said the words Hannah had been desperate to hear. Okay, Hannah. Next contraction. We push. The pain became something else entirely. All-consuming. Hannah screamed, sobbed, felt Michael's hand crushing hers and crushed right back. You're doing so well, Dr. Chen encouraged. I can see the head. One more push. Hannah bore down with everything she had, every ounce of strength, every moment of suffering from the past 7 months channeled into this one effort. And then, relief, sudden and overwhelming, followed by the most beautiful sound Hannah had ever heard, her daughter crying. It's a girl, Dr. Chen announced unnecessarily. Perfect. Healthy. A little small, but perfect. They placed the baby on Hannah's chest. Tiny, red-faced, furious at being evicted from her warm home. Hannah touched her daughter's face with trembling fingers, counted fingers and toes, marveled at the miracle of new life. She's beautiful, Hannah whispered through tears. She's perfect. Michael stood frozen beside the bed, staring at this tiny human who'd just entered the world. Hannah saw something she'd never seen before on his face. Wonder. Pure, uncomplicated wonder. "Do you want to hold her?" Hannah asked softly. He hesitated. "I don't know how." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together." Dr. Chen helped transfer the baby into Michael's arms, showed him how to support her head, how to hold her securely, then stepped back. Michael looked down at the infant in his arms, this tiny life that weighed maybe 5 pounds, who had no idea she'd just been born into a world of violence and protection, who didn't know the man holding her had killed to keep her mother safe. "You'll never know fear," he whispered. So quietly Hannah almost missed it. "Not while I'm alive, I promise you that." The baby stopped crying, opened her eyes, looked up at Michael like she understood, like she recognized something in him that the rest of the world missed. Hannah watched them, this feared crime lord and this newborn baby, and understood that everything had changed. Not just for her, for all of them. "What's her name?" Dr. Chen asked, preparing paperwork. Hannah didn't hesitate. "Grace. Her name is Grace." Michael looked up. Their eyes met. Understanding passed between them without words. Grace. Because that's what he'd given her when she had nothing left. Unearned. Unexpected. Transformative grace. "Grace," he repeated, testing it. "It's perfect." 4 months later, the mansion had transformed. No longer sterile and silent. Now it echoed with baby sounds, crying and cooing and the random chaos that comes with new life. Hannah stood in the kitchen, making coffee. Through the doorway, she could see Michael in the living room, feeding Grace her morning bottle, talking to her in that soft voice he used only with the baby, completely absorbed in this tiny human who'd wrapped him around her finger without trying. Guards still patrolled the grounds. Business still required his attention. The empire still ran on discipline and control. But inside these walls, something had shifted. Light had found its way in. Hannah thought about La Riva, about the kitchen where she'd broken down 7 months ago, where porcelain had shattered and tears had fallen, and the most powerful man in Chicago had heard her when everyone else pretended not to. That kitchen had been cold, clinical, a place of humiliation and exhaustion. This kitchen was warm, filled with morning light and the smell of coffee and the sound of Michael singing softly to Grace in the next room. The same man, different context, different purpose. Hannah had been terrified of him once. Terrified of what his protection might cost. What strings might be attached. What price she'd eventually have to pay. But there was no price, no strings, just a man who'd spent his life building walls and finally found something worth letting inside. Michael appeared in the doorway, Grace asleep against his shoulder. "Coffee smells good." "She down?" Hannah asked. "Finally, though I think she was just humoring me." He settled into a chair, adjusting Grace carefully. "I never thought..." "What?" "That I'd have this. Any of this." He looked at Hannah. "I built everything I have on being untouchable, unreachable. And then you walked into my life crying over a broken plate. Best plate I ever dropped," Hannah said with a small smile. Michael laughed. Actually laughed. A sound that would shock everyone who knew him. "Best decision I ever made was walking into that kitchen." Hannah moved to sit beside him, looked at Grace sleeping peacefully, at Michael watching her with such tenderness, at the life they'd somehow built from broken pieces and desperate circumstances. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. Thank you for trusting me." He met her eyes. "For seeing past what I am to who I'm trying to be." Grace stirred, made a small noise, settled back into sleep. And in that moment, Hannah understood something fundamental. The most dangerous man in Chicago had become the safest place she'd ever known. Not because his violence had disappeared, but because he'd chosen to aim it at protecting rather than destroying. Sometimes salvation comes from unexpected places. Sometimes the hands that save you are stained with blood. Sometimes the most dangerous man in the city isn't the one you should fear, but the one who finally decides to protect you. And that made all the difference. And that's the end of today's love story. If it warmed your heart or made you believe in love a little more, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every word you write inspires the next story we tell. Until tomorrow, keep loving deeply and dreaming fearlessly.